Hello again, everybody. Welcome to our next presentation, simply called Remarkable User Experience, or UX. Our presenter for this session is Kevin Goldman, who's the Chief Experience Officer from Trusona. Kevin.
Yeah, we'll just make sure that's up, and then we'll switch to the first slide. Excellent. Customer experience itself is proving to be the only truly durable competitive advantage. Anybody ever heard that from Gartner? Customer experience itself is proving to be the only truly durable competitive advantage. We're at a security and technology conference, so I'm not sure if everybody is aligned with that concept or heard of that concept. So let's look at some examples of customer experience. This is Colin. Colin drives a 2015 Prius. On the left, Colin drives that Prius for Uber. And then on the right, Colin drives the same Prius for Lyft. So what does this mean? This means that you could go to dinner with Colin in his Prius through Uber, and you can drive home from that same dinner with the same Colin and the same Prius from Lyft. Like many drivers, they drive for both. So is the experience different when you drive through Uber or drive through Lyft? Let's look at another example. And let me just double check. Is the mic on my shirt working, or do I have to stay right here? I have to stay right here. All right. Here's another interesting example. Both remotes play the exact same content. They have the exact same features in terms of, like, I'm able to search, I can pause, I can fast forward. However, is the customer experience the same? If the customer experience is the only truly durable competitive advantage, we're now all in the CX business. We must all be able to create great experiences. To do so, we need to replace friction with simplicity, ease, delight, meaning. We need to do that systematically. So let's get down to the brass tacks here. We have classic authentication on the left, and we have modern, just one example. We have many examples of modern authentication, but just one example of modern authentication on the right. So security aside for just a moment, one of the problems with classic authentication is that it introduces friction into every single user experience there is, into the customer journeys. I call classic authentication the universal friction because it exists for every company, in every industry, in every part of the world. So the promise of the modern authentication on the right is that it can resolve this friction and actually do it in a way that's more secure. And modern authentication fulfills that security promise. The specs are written. The technology, the crypto is largely good to go. We have more work to do, but it's largely good to go. There are now 4 billion devices out there that support this modern authentication. But here's the kicker. Why is all that's there, but why is adoption low? It could be that it's just a new technology. So things take time, and it will. Adoption is increasing. We heard lots of stories over the last few days of adoption increasing. It's wonderful. But here's another reason why adoption hasn't hit that J-curve yet. It's because classic authentication is a behavior that's been passed down from one generation to the next for at least 3 times. It is what I call a generational behavior. Username and passwords are one of the oldest behaviors in our digital society. I mean, they really are. So we even teach our kids how classic authentication works. When my son was 7 years old, I told him this. He was asking, what is a password? What does this work? I said, your password makes your account more secure. And I'm in the industry, and I told him this. And I imagine if you have kids or nieces or nephews, you probably tell them some sort of version of this same myth. So these non-factual stories, it's called folk security. If you haven't heard about and read about folk security, it's very real. And our behavior follows these stories. So we can't be concerned with just the bits and bytes of modern authentication. To make our digital society more secure, we have to influence people away from that generational classic behavior of username and passwords and move them to a modern authentication behavior. So yes, Apple, Google, these large companies have done incredible work over the years to change this behavior on their phones. But there's still a lot of ways to go to enable this new behavior in any authentication context. So technological advancements still need to be made, but changing these behaviors and the folk security stories that we tell, I'm a little biased, but I think that's the new battleground for modern authentication adoption. All right. So normally when I talk about this generational behavior, I'm talking about end users. And here I also want to bring up the topic that we also need to change the behavior of the makers, of the developers, the designers, the product owners, the legal teams, the fraud teams. When a developer sits down to create a new Rails application, it's just easier. It's just easier to implement username and password. It's within their existing storyline and ethos, mythology to do so. It's also in their tooling. It is dead simple to add classic authentication to a Rails app with a couple lines of command lines. So there's friction not only in the end user experience that we need to solve for, but there's also friction in the experience of the makers. So I'll spend the remaining 10 minutes or so talking about just 3 ways we can move people from that classic behavior of usernames and passwords to the modern authentication. There are many more than 3, but we only have time for 3. All right, it's always best to start at the beginning. And this seems obvious. When you start your modern authentication project, you go to the quick starts and the getting started documentations for this modern authentication, right? So I recommend we start somewhere else. Let's start by assembling a cross-disciplinary team that will implement your modern authentication. It should include a diverse team of engineers, UX research, content strategists, legal, fraud, product management, etc. And actually, the last few days, I've heard this sentiment expressed a few times. The engineering team definitely will go to these docs and look at those first. But don't start just with the technology bits and bytes. You need those other disciplines to do their own reconnaissance and then come back through their own lenses and work as a cross-disciplinary team to influence each other from the start. Number 2, plain English. It's hard to keep the words that we use in modern authentication simple and clear. People are used to username and password. That's the generational behavior that they know. This is such an important concept, this concept of plain English. You could call it many things. I call it plain English. if you take away anything from this presentation, it's taking away this concept of plain English in your modern authentication experiences. And take away this, it's going to take you longer than you think to get to a place where your experiences use plain English. So here's some examples. If you haven't noticed, we have a lot of words to call the same thing. So as an ecosystem of platform providers and consortiums and alliances and relying parties, we're not yet making it simple for people to know what the heck we're talking about. So when you introduce modern authentication to your users, what are you going to call it? And are they going to understand what you're talking about? Let's look at one way this introduction is solved, and it's solved with just 10 words. These 10 words are simple and clear, and they're helpful. They use plain English. But it was not trivial to arrive here. A diverse team of designers, engineers, content strategists, product owners from Visa, from Wells Fargo, from Microsoft, from Chase, from my company Trusona, from Facebook, and others. And we usability tested many, many iterations of this messaging to arrive at these 10 words. Seems simple, right? Notice how this message leads with the concept of easy. Whoop, looks like that got switched on the translation there. And we're not leading with a message of security. Notice how it uses the word safe and doesn't use the word secure. It's funny, yeah, the font changed on the other system. Notice how it says access your account, and it doesn't say a technical word like authenticate. There's reasons for all these decisions. This is just one of many examples of really well-executed plain English, and this is part of the FIDO UX guidelines that was published earlier this year, and that Sandra and I will talk about in the next session. These guidelines are user-tested for consumer desktop platform authenticators in the financial services world. However, you should download them if whatever industry you're in, because the concepts within those guidelines can be applied to a lot of different use cases. All right, last one. Number 3, UX research portfolio. This sort of ties together your cross-disciplinary team and your plain English together. Yes, you have very smart people on your team, but you will always increase the likelihood of success when you use an evidence-based research approach. And it's not about just doing UX research here and there and fits and starts. You need a simple and methodical way of approaching your UX research. So look at this. It's on a continuum. It's pretty simple. On the left, we have this concept of generative research. So generative research is research that generates clarity around the problem that you're solving. And on the other side, the right side, we have evaluative research. And evaluative research evaluates how well you've solved that problem for the end users, and is it usable? And there's one more axis, and that's the vertical axis. And you want to be doing low fidelity research and high fidelity research. And I'll show a couple examples of this. To sum this up, here's some 2 great quotes, not from me. This first one's quite old. A problem well defined is a problem half solved. That's what that whole left side is about. And then on the right, if you know Jared Spool, very famous UX, called him researcher, thought leader, he said if it's not usable, it's not secure. If it's not usable, it's not secure. That means if a system isn't usable, people will find a way to work around it, and thus it will become not as secure. All right, we'll look at a few examples. Here's when we did some research at Trusona for our desktop authentication, we did some generative research, we did some low fidelity research, some more evaluative research, and I'm going to show you a very quick snippet of a research participant in our usability lab. You'll see some lines that's eye tracking.
Okay, you'll scan 2 codes with your Trusona mobile app. Continue. Set up your account, scan one of 2, scan with your Trusona mobile app. So I have a scan, so I'm going to do that. Acme Company would like to confirm your enrollment to Windows, reject, accept.
Not all your research needs to be that high fidelity, but we were working with a 2-screen experience. We wanted to see where is she looking in her environment? Where is she looking for cues? And so we need to understand that context. Let's see if we can go. Okay, so here's the FIDO UX task force and the guidelines we create. Here's some of the types of research that we performed during that project. High fidelity, did a lot of low fidelity, evaluate, a little bit of generative. We'll talk about this more in the next session, a reminder. And I'll show you a very short snippet of a research participant in this project.
And then I would sign in. Okay. Oh, here we go. This is that sign in part that I was saying. I'm seeing it's allowing me that I logged in, but now it's offering me the ability to, in the future, use my thumbprint thing to sign in. I mean, I like it because I have been using this feature. So the fact that that popped up, I'm excited about that. It's offering me a simpler way to log in next time. And that is, from my experience, it's not saying all this in the text, but it's going to save my password and connect it to this thumbprint scanner. So the next time that I log into this site, I can just use my finger to log in, my fingerprint.
And what is it that gives you that impression?
The icon. It looks like it's Apple's, I believe this is Apple's or whoever designed this icon for thumbprint scanner.
Did you hear all that folk security? There's a lot of it in there. But that's what we're working with. That's how we're trying to figure that stuff out and learn what people are thinking in their minds. So we're poised to resolve this universal friction of username and password. It'll take more than specs, bits, and bytes, because there are too many old school behaviors, too many workarounds, too many things that can be compromised, lost, and stolen until now. This is about a completely new approach to a very old problem. Not another lock bolted onto the problem, not another step added to the user experience. This is about making security and usability symbiotic. It's about increasing security through usability. It's about the human side of the screen. It's about precisely measuring and removing friction. So people prefer and adopt the more secure option. This is modern authentication experiences. Thank you.
So we've got just a few minutes, probably for 2 questions, one here and one online. Does anyone here in the audience have a question they'd like to ask Kevin? No? All right, then.
So hi, this is Liz Vota. I used to be part of the FIDO Alliance on the board from Wells Fargo and before that Bank of America. And I just can't say enough about how much I appreciated the work that was done by this group. I've been part of the FIDO Alliance since 2014 and had been asking for us to pay attention to the consumer experience and behavior. And this really took it to a level that was so very, very helpful. I took those guidelines and brought them right into Wells Fargo, and I have no doubt, I'm not there anymore, but I have no doubt that at some point in the future when FIDO gets introduced there, that these guidelines will add tremendous value to that implementation. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone involved. That's it.
Thank you. And Andrew sitting over there, thank you, Andrew, for forming the task force.
Thank you, Liz. So we have one question online. Oh, it disappeared. Okay. So we have one question that says, how much investment does a company have to make to build up UX competencies? Big question.
Yeah, well, UX is the only truly durable competitive advantage. So I guess it's up to them how much they want to invest. And I don't mean that to be snarky. I mean, but it is true. There are ways you can, if you don't have UX, you don't have UX teams, you're a small company, there are ways you can get some of this UX leadership and practices and methodologies into your organization without spending a lot of money. There's a lot of contracting resources, a lot of agencies, both big and small, that you can contract without hiring in teams. And it's also very, very acceptable for small organizations to have a UX team of one. You can get a lot of value out of one really great UX designer or UX researcher. So there are many ways to get started and recommend you get started.
Great, thank you. And let's thank Kevin once again for his great presentation. Stay tuned. He'll be doing a command repeat performance in 5 minutes along with Sandra. So hang around, please. Thanks.